history segment that goes over all your favorite games. Welcome to Nintendo 101. Pokemon Red and Blue were so freaking awesome. Catching monsters, battling gym leaders, trading with friends, taking some kids' lunch money. It caught on like wildfire all over the world. So, it goes without saying that Game Freak was doing pretty darn well with their series. And probably swimming in money. So naturally, they wanted to make a sequel that'd be as big a hit as their last 3 games. But since this game was so different than other RPGs, there were endless ways to improve it. Maybe new Pokemon? A new region? New evolutions? What was Game Freak's way of making a sequel for this game? Well, you came to the right place to find out. Welcome to Nintendo 101, where we'll be going over the history of Pokemon Gold and Silver. So this game was first announced in 1997, a year before Red and Blue's worldwide release, named Pocket Monsters 2, Gold and Silver. These games were set for release later that year, and would be featured on the original Game Boy, and enhanced for the Super Game Boy. For those who don't know, the Super Game Boy was Nintendo's way of pimping out their portable games on consoles, with tints, borders, and sometimes even multiplayer. But if you check out these early screenshots, the game, didn't look all that different from the original, minus the different color palettes. But don't let looks deceive you. Game Freak pointed out this was an entirely new game, and that it would feature a new region, 100 new Pokemon, a real-time clock, new moves, new evolutions of existing Pokemon. It was any fan's dream. But what's even more interesting is the artistic direction the developers took with these new Pokemon, since they're quite a departure from the originals. There were tons of new monsters made, but as I said before, only 100 made the cut. And some are just weird. You see, what you gotta understand is that the original Pokemon were based around genetics and artificial engineering. The starters Oak gave you represented reptiles and even had some characteristics of dinosaurs. Voltorb is a reject Pokeball experiment. Eevee has multiple evolutions due to its unstable DNA. And the fossilized Pokemon were, well, fossils. However, with these new Pokemon, Game Freak took a more traditional approach. The starters here represented purity, and stuck with their original types the whole game. There was also a huge emphasis on legendary monsters, and gave the game a more relaxing tone overall. Pokemon just felt more natural to their surroundings, like a living, breathing ecosystem, rather than just an assortment of genetically mutated animals. So as you can see, Pocket Monsters 2 had a lot going for it, and was shaping up to be a truly special sequel. But of course, to implement all these new features, the game got delayed. But we're not talking some normal delay either, we're talking 2 years. In fact, the only information we got in 1998 was that the 2 in the title was dropped. Woohoo! But luckily, Japanese gamers got distracted with the release of Pocket Monsters Pikachu Edition, or as we know, Pokemon Yellow version, which loosely follows the original games, but follows the popular anime. Isn't it great what a little marketing can do? Anyway, after Yellow came and went, the craze continued and a couple spin-offs came out, like Pokemon Stadium, where you could battle with your monsters in 3D, and the Pokemon Trading Card Game, where you could play the famed card battle game on the go. I'll admit some of these weren't that good, I'm looking at you, but some are actually pretty darn awesome, and made fans even more attached to their critters. Lots more also came out over the years, but I'll save those for another day. But more importantly, this was the year Pokemon Red and Blue were set to be released worldwide. And boy oh boy, was Game Freak skeptical. They were really worried that the monsters were too cute and cuddly for people outside of Japan. Luckily, they were proven completely wrong, the game was shipped with almost no major changes, and the craze was just as big all over the world. Okay, back on track. After a long delay, Gold and Silver were finally coming out in Japan in late 1999. Apparently Game Freak wanted to take their time all along, so they could create them for the new and awesome Game Boy Color. If that wasn't cool enough, this also gave them a chance to create hype, and how they integrated these new Pokemon before release was pretty darn cool. Some of these critters already showed up in the anime, there was tons of merchandise out, and some Pokédex books would even cover them. So are you seeing the reoccurring theme of marketing here? Since fans were super excited about Pokemon they didn't know about, discussions and theories popped up everywhere. Not to mention the anime was about to take place in this new region, and the expansion packs for the trading cards actually featured these new Pokemon. Alright, enough marketing and beta crap. Let's get straight to the meat and potatoes, shall we? So the plot here is pretty much the same. You're a boy in Johto starting your Pokemon journey, and trained to be the region's champion. Johto also happens to be a region in Japan. But what's amazing is that within, 10 minutes of gameplay, you'll immediately notice some differences. Your once again single mom gives you a Pokegear that lets you call people. The overworld looks a lot more vibrant, and the background a lot more relaxing. The professor in this game, Elm, is also quite a contrast to Oak, flailing around like a 12-year-old with ADD. But then, you hit the wild grass. Now this here is a pivotal moment for the player, and will definitely differ for each journey. What the heck is going to show up, you might think? Well, you're either going to get A, Pidgey, a returning Pokemon, B, Sentret, an all-new Pokemon, or if you're playing at night, C, Hoot, an all-new night-exclusive Pokemon. Either way, the player will be very excited for what they see, and will definitely be impressed if they played the original. And they have every right to be. I mean, look at it. Everything's in color, attacks look flashier, and your sprite doesn't look like complete garbage anymore. There's even an experience bar, so you aren't constantly checking your stats in the menus. So anyway, during your battles you'll be attacking and taking damage, and chances are you'll get hit enough. And wham! Your Pokemon eats something. That's right, Pokemon can now have held items without a turn being used. One of the most convenient systems I've ever seen in an RPG. So within only 10 minutes of gameplay, you've pretty much learned the basic improvements of this game. Held items, better graphics, a combination of new and old Pokemon. And what's even better is that they did it without shoving tutorials down your throat, so you feel like you're actually legitimately learning something. But the insane amount of changes don't stop there. Every badge or so the game chucks another idea at you. By the time you've reached the first gym, you've already beaten a criminal who's stolen the professor's Pokemon. You've received a Pokédex from the now famous Professor Oak. You've beaten every sage, including the Elder, in a sacred training tower at Violet City, who all had stupid Bellsprouts, but still. The game has tons and tons of awesome ideas, and isn't afraid to pull any stops. Now even though this all sounds kinda complex, Game Freak made this game so it would be tailored to all ages. A little kid could play this game just for the story and just plow through the game, while an older gamer could take advantage of the expansive world given to him. That way, everyone's happy and Game Freak makes millions. But there's a couple features that made this game really, really special. So let's dissect these, shall we? Now first up is the improved combat system. Let's face it, the original system was somewhat flawed. Some types had almost no moves, special stats were stuck together, and psychic Pokemon... But this new system delivered on tons of levels. Move types were switched to make more sense. Special attack and special defense were split for more balance. The steel type was added to make awesome type resistances, and the dark type was added to counteract those ungodly cheap psychic types. This gave new players a nice balanced system to use, while Pokeveterans appreciated the changes and learned the ropes of new attacks. Now second up is Day and Night. Now this personally gave me an emotional bond to the game. The real-time clock made the game dark when it was dark outside. If it was morning, the nurse at the Pokemon Center would be like, "Oh, good morning," and stuff. I don't know, it just felt like a neat interaction to me. But of course, the main point of this is that wild encounters would change based on the time you play. It just made Pokemon blend better with their environments. Kinda like I could actually compare Pokemon to real life. Crazy, I know. Alright, number 3 is Team Rocket. So now we know from Red and Blue that they're a pretty crappy criminal organization, run by their mob-like boss, Giovanni. Well, following events in the first game, Team Rocket was disbanded 3 years ago after the main character beat the boss at his own gym, and Giovanni ran away all butthurt. So how could they possibly make a plot around a shut-down team? Well, apparently the leftover grunts at Team Rocket wanted their share of mischief at a new region, with the overall goal of getting Giovanni to return. Now don't get me wrong, these guys had awesome hideouts, but I really hope Giovanni would have actually returned. Since in the original Gold and Silver these bosses didn't have names and weren't all that memorable, they don't really live up to their full potential. Now fourth up is Legendary Pokemon. As I said before, most of Johto's lore comes from a bunch of legendaries, which even have some buildings and dungeons dedicated to them. Along with the 2 main legendaries on the covers, there were also some roaming ones that changed their route every time you enter a new one. I mean, how cool is that? You're just walking around some weak route, minding your own business, and whoa! A level 40 legendary pops out of nowhere. Yeah, tracking him down might be a pain in the butt, but it made players get ready with equipment and flea-preventing moves at all times. Now fifth up is trading Pokemon. Now Game Freak could have taken the easy way out with this one. You know, just do the same thing from Red and Blue with link cables. However, Bill, that weird geek who likes turning himself into Pokemon from the original, created a machine called the Time Capsule, which lets you trade with Pokemon Red and Blue. Sure, you can only give or take the first 151 with moves only featured in the original, but backwards compatibility with actual games were pretty darn rare back then, and Red and Blue owners had a reason to train their old teams. And last but not least is Kanto. My god, if a game's ever blown my mind, it's after you beat this game's champion. You know, just when you think you're done, you have to collect the original 8 badges from Red and Blue. But this isn't just a simple game extra. The world has morphed and changed to represent the 3 years that have passed. Cinnabar Island is now volcanic rubble, Viridian Forest has been chopped down, Blue has a gym made of Legos. This gave players another journey to complete, while all the old players get to nostalgia about the places they thought they once knew. You see how the game constantly caters to its fans? Now, as awesome as this game is, there's a couple things that Game Freak didn't get right this time. But still, I firmly believe that this is the sequel that the franchise needed. The first problem is that Kanto was pretty barren. I mean, it was awesome being able to plow through it again, don't get me wrong, but tons of stuff was stripped, there was almost 0 side quests, and most local attractions were off limits. The remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver mostly fixed this, but they really could have put more effort into the revisit of this region. Now, second up is that problems from the original still remain. The HP bar still takes forever to go down, which adds unnecessary hours of playing. Battles can still turn into a MASH A-fest, which could have been solved by just giving trainers conflicting types, not 6 coughings. Catching Pokemon can also still lead up to chance, which costs you fortunes in Pokeballs. Now, these aren't deal breakers or anything, but the small annoyances still remain for us veteran players. And last up is that the storyline isn't nearly as engaging. In the original, having your rival besting you at every turn was pretty cool. In this game, he just complains about you caring about Pokemon. He doesn't even have a legitimate backstory, and you don't even understand his goals completely. Also, in the original, Team Rocket had legitimately interesting plans, like the takeover of Silphco and killing Cubone's mother and all that jazz. In this game, Team Rocket just goofs around doing glorified childish pranks, like cutting Slowpoke tails. Talk about unmemorable. Alright then, let's get on to the review. Fun. Now this game is tons of fun to play, and there's a lot of welcome additions to the formula that go in seamlessly. Only problem? The story isn't as strong as the last gen, as well as Kanto being a bit barren. So because of that, 9. Now looks-wise, this is a huge improvement over the original. The Pokemon sprites look a lot more detailed and colorful, while the backgrounds also look a bit more vibrant. The only problem is it doesn't really push the limits of the hardware, but still very clean looking. 9. Now sound-wise, this is some really good 8-bit stuff, and they definitely all belong on your iPod. I know, the Pokemon cries are still woo, but still, it's a great soundtrack nonetheless. 10. Now lengthwise. Oh my god, you're getting over 250 Pokemon to collect, 16 badges, and over a 60-hour main quest. What more could you ask for? 10. Now difficulty-wise, I'm gonna give this a low. Mostly because the game's pretty easy to plow through, but if you want to get the most out of the game, it's still pretty easy to do for those older players. So I'm gonna give this game a 9 out of 10. And this is the sequel that the series needed. It improves almost exponentially on the original formula, and it is definitely a must-have for any Pokemon fan. But I'm not done yet. After the financial success of Gold and Silver, the developers decided to create a director's cut of them, Pokemon Crystal version. This game had moving Pokemon, which was mind-blowing for fans, a stronger storyline for Eugene and the legendary Suicune, the choice to play as a girl, and a battle tower, where players could fight against trainer after trainer for prizes. Reviews for these games were somewhat lower since there weren't any major changes, but many considered this to be the definitive Pokemon game. But the interesting thing is that Pokemon wasn't meant to go on. Game Freak went into these games thinking this is the end, and would work on a new series. Since its generation sold like hotcakes though, there was a lot of pressure for a sequel. This resulted in sequels for the Game Boy Advance 2 years later, but that story's for another time. Alright my friends, that concludes this segment. Subscribe if you like my stuff as usual, and I'll be back next time on 101 with the history of the Mother series, or as most of you know, Earthbound. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll be back very soon with more videos. So, in the meantime, this is Balrog signing out, and I'll see all of you very soon. I hope.